Okay, continuing where I left off. Still got a lot more to show. Probably need to speed this up. Got some step fractures there. Didn't seem to bother the flint knapper. Looks like it was a well-used point. Heat damage on this side. And possibly on this side after the fact. Very nicely formed base, but the blade is not in line with it. There's a curve in it. So if you hefted the base or the stem straight, the blade would be off. So that's not a problem with a knife, but with a projectile point, you would need a large notch in your foreshaft, and you would have to cant the stem this way and put that flat side up against the side of that notch to get the blade to center itself with the foreshaft. Which may have been what they did. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to keep these in little groups. Forgot which pile I picked that one out of. I'm trying to keep them in groups that are similar so we don't get too frazzled looking at these at random. Because the base and stem forms change quite a bit. The blades are pretty consistent, but you know, you'll get thin stems and thick stems and different types of flaking. You know, sometimes you'll have a distinctive thinning flake in the center on each side, and sometimes you won't. Sometimes you see the difference. This one has several thinning flakes up from the middle of the base. But this one has a distinctive, almost a fluting type of flake on both sides. Now all these have short barbs in this little stack. The Pedernales seem to come in two varieties. One variety has narrow blades with short barbs, and the other style has, you know, wide blades with long barbs. Although the blade width is similar. I've seen stage ones of this type that are much wider. This one here looks like it was broken in manufacture. You can see how they were developing the edge on this one. Very wide stem. This one has a little bit of the cortex or some other area of the rock that looks like cortex, but it could be just a odd area of the stone. Very long basal thinning flake. If you only saw that part, if it was broken across the top of the stem there, it would almost look like an old paleo style point. because the edges feel slightly ground on this one. Especially down here, they do feel like there's some abrasion. But these are Middle Archaic, so that there was at least 6,000 years between these and the Paleo points. So they're not related at all as far as time. Did I say 6,000? It could be even more. It could be like 7,000 or 8,000 years between these and Paleo points. These are 2,500 to 3,500 BC. I have to look that up again. Again, I don't know if it's BP or BC. Anyway. Slight twist in the blade. Twist is not a thing with these. Sometimes you'll see it, but not often. Okay, now we're moving into some other types here. I'm not even sure if these are classified as Pedernales. These four. First off, you'll notice that the flaking on the blade is not as bold as these. And it could be the material they're working, or it could be the knapping style. Poor material will not allow you to send in large flakes. This could also be heavily reworked. The edge is kind of sharp. Not really, but kind of. Very nice material. It looks like an impact fracture. A little over 3/4, so I would say that this is a atlatl dart point. I would say all of these are atlatl dart points, whereas some of these Pedernales have stems that are much wider, and I would tend to think that these are knives or handheld spear points compared to these. Yeah, I would much rather put these on a handle like this. These you wouldn't, because they're just too small. But they would fit nicely onto something like that. It's hard to tell unless you cut them together like this in a grouping. The relative sizes. It's hard to gauge when you just have pictures with the measurements. There really is no substitute to having them right here all together in one spot. Base is pretty thick on most of these. Stem is pretty thick on most of these. Whereas the stems on these, see how much thicker that is with a more narrow stem but thicker, wider stem but thinner. That probably makes a difference when you're hafting it, or the type of haft that you want to achieve. This is a very strong haft. It resists snapping across the notches. These all look reworked. Okay, now we're getting into another type. I think these are Jetta points. They're much thinner on average, and they've got a distinctive kind of flaking on the stem. instead of having the minute or small flaking, kind of deliberate, it looks more random. And these, a lot of times the stems are expanding and not like this. These are kind of bow-legged. A lot of these are expanding, so I think these are what they call Jetta points. Not very sharp. This one just it has a very small area of sharpness here. They might look crude, but the skill required to achieve this kind of thinness and this kind of flaking is amazing. It's hard for me to do this, especially with percussion, and especially when it's this thin, and doing a large percussion flake near the base or near the stem at a late stage risks breaking it. You know, like this guy probably broke this in manufacturing doing those gung-ho thinning flakes. That's a large thinning flake there. And it could have easily overshot and took off that barb. So yeah, it's probably broken in manufacture during the next strike. But yeah, very skillful. You need a very skillful technique to do this. Minimal flaking to achieve that kind of thinness is high skill. Okay. Bold flaking on one side. Kind of crude, relatively speaking. This one looks like it's a finished point with impact fractures. Almost 1 inch wide, so, you know, these probably were 1/2 to 2. That little dart 4 shafts, but it would need to be, I don't know, it's a mystery. Why would you put something that thin on a handheld spear point? You may be throwing them by hand, I guess, but the 4 shaft would need to be quite thick in diameter. But a thick diameter 4 shaft doesn't make sense with a thin point, because you're going to have a abrupt transition between the thin point and your 4 shaft. So this was a knife blade that was impacted, used to impact something at high speed, or it was hafted to an odd shaped little dart 4 shaft where it was wide in this direction but thin in this direction. And I've not seen that. I've seen all the 4 shafts that I've seen for little darts are round or oval. They're not flattened. So that's a mystery to me what this style was used for. But you know, I've seen all kinds of these points with impact fractures, so they were throwing them or impacting on something. Some of these are very violent deaths, so to speak. Again, the bold flaking toward the end of the manufacturing process probably snapped this point. These edges are not abraded at all. Maybe very slightly. This one not at all. This one maybe, but I don't know. Some of these ears on the tip feel a little dull. Some of them don't. Like that one feels sharp all the way around. This one feels slightly dulled. Anyway, it could be just personal preference on these. Each napper had their own preference on what areas they were going to dull on the stem. Let's see, what's next here? I'll show these. These are almost complete. Two of the most complete ones I have in this collection. This one's very nice, looks reworked. Just a little bit off the tip, that's it. Again, this one has a base that if you haft it in straight, the blade is canted, so you'd have to haft it against a flat bottom notch with the side, one of the vertical sides right up against, or this right up against one of the vertical sides in the notch in order to align that blade. Pretty much the same with this one here, but these ears are skewed. See that? You can haft it into a notch easily, but the blade is canted off to the side. Nice, hefty, strong stem. The edge looks like it's sharp, but it really isn't. It's kind of dull, like it was well used. And it has those kind of a telltale edge that it has been, used against something to create those little dulled areas and those little step fractures that are caused by use wear, and those little breakages that result when you break off a very thin, delicate edge. Impact fracture most likely. A little over 7/8. Some of this material looks very nice. Most of these edges on these points so far have not been sharp. Not like some of the other types. In general, Montell is probably going to feel sharper because it's a younger type point. I think the time period is late Archaic, 400 BC to 800 BC. I need to look that up again. Anyway, this one has some cortex on it. Very thin. Made on a skinning flake, looks like. You don't need to heat these. In many cases, the skinning flakes are high quality. You don't need to heat. Looks like a finished point with a snap from some type of use. Kind of a distinctive Pedernales base. Nice and hefty and strong. Same with this one. This one feels like a heat treat. Because the edges, I can feel, the edges feel like they're heat treated. It's hard to explain, but looks like it was reworked and then impact damage. Very nice material. I don't know where this material would come from. I haven't seen it. I don't have any of this color in my stash of rocks. Very interesting. I imagine the history behind that would be interesting. The base is more narrow than a lot of these other ones. The stem is more narrow. Yeah. Just a little over 3/4. So that would probably go on, fit nicely onto an atlatl dart foreshaft. Although, in this case, I would have to say that the notch in the foreshaft was an inverted V in order to, make it a strong haft as far as impacts go. But it's got a delicate area at the bottom of the notch, so that wouldn't make any sense resting up against wood, because that snaps off easily. And it snaps off as you're trying to seat it to see if it'll fit. Those things snap off. Those delicate areas snap off when you're trying to fit it and see if it fits in the foreshaft you're making for it. So it doesn't make much sense. Using a lot of glue and seating it into glue would make sense, but then you would need some high quality glue. And high quality glue is easy to make when you have pottery, but these were before the pottery era. Okay. Now this pile here has relatively long stems, and they may not be Pedernales points. This looks like it could be petrified wood, but I would tend to say no, but it's hard to tell. Very well made, symmetrical, carefully flaked. Three-quarter-inch stem, perfect for an lateral dart point, in my opinion. Let's see if that's translucent. Yeah. You can kind of see the tool. Might even, it looks like vertical punch work on both. It's quite a coincidence that we have expanding notching on both, like it's a vertical punch. I think that's the only one I have like that. And there's one on the base also. Very unusual. I don't have many like this. I don't think I have any like this. But we'll see. I've got a bunch more to go. Probably 4 or 5 more videos of this type of artifact. These stemmed pieces with bifurcated stems. Massive thinning flakes first, and then edge retouch with pressure, but didn't run thinning flakes, just retouch, which gives it that 2 ridges, 1 ridge on each ear, kind of distinctive look. So I would say that's a Pedernales base or stem, but it's more narrow than a lot of these. So see, that's almost 3/4, which is quite narrow compared to other classic looking Pedernales stems. So there's a wide variation. Maybe knife, maybe projectile point. Hard to say. This one probably had some barbs that were quite large. Probably in line with this type. At one point, it looks like it would probably have a barb that looked like this, but it snapped off. Nice hefty stem. edges somewhat sharp. Probably heat treated. Although a lot of this stone does feel raw, but it also feels like very high quality stone. So not difficult to nap. I would guess this is broken in manufacture since there's a big gap or a big space between the notch and the edge of the blade. It's bigger than a lot of these other Pedernales points. Either that or this is not a Pedernales, it's maybe some other type. But it has this characteristic large thinning flake on one side at least. But it may be a Laguna or something like that. And we have stone here in Texas that looks like Knife River flint, even to include little white splotches within the stone, but this is what we call root beer. Now most of this looks like just banding within the stone, but we have some that looks just like Knife River. Probably naps the same. I've tried one piece of Knife River and it did nap like high quality root beer. A lot of nice pressure flaking on this one. It's a Buren flake scar. I can't tell if this is an impact fracture or just maybe it was reworked and then used as a. I know this is reworked here, but you know, first it probably had an impact fracture and then had some retouching on the blade to use as a knife or something. I don't know. This is one of those mid-grade types of stone. It's difficult to work unless you work a bunch of it and get used to it. I heat treat this kind of stuff, but who knows, this may be raw. Okay.